Hi, welcome back. So today I just wanted to kind of go over what it looks like when planning to hike the Tahoe Rim Trail. I think planning for everyone can look a little different. Some people like to plan more, some people like to plan less. I definitely am someone that probably errs on the side of over planning. Part of that has to do with the fact that I tend to hike solo and I just want to make sure I'm prepared and make sure that I have accommodations when I need to, make sure I know how much food I need to carry, what my water situations will look like, and all that is based off of essentially like how many miles I think I'll be able to do per day. So specifically when it came to planning for the Tahoe Rim Trail, the first thing you have to consider is which direction you want to go. So because it's a loop, obviously you can either go clockwise or counterclockwise. I think from what I saw, and also then even when I was researching, it seems that clockwise is probably the more common direction. But I think that it really is just totally personal preference on what you want to do. So for me, I chose to go counterclockwise. Part of the reasoning for that was essentially, to me, I wanted to decide like where I wanted to end. Where did I want to, have my long water carries? At what point in the trip did I want to go through desolation? Where did I want my resupply to be? So based off of those factors, for me, it felt like counterclockwise was the direction I wanted to go. And then ultimately I decided, well, what did I want my resupply point to be, which would then help me determine where I wanted to start. There's a couple of key starting locations. You got Kingsbury North, Kingsbury South, Echo Chalet, Tahoe City. Some people even I think start in South Lake. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. So based off that, where you want to start, maybe logistically, how many miles you want to do when it comes to your food carry, you can decide what your starting point was. So for me, it was important to have desolation towards the end of my hike. I really wanted to kind of end on that high note with desolation, and I figured let's get the dry section of the trail on the east side out of the way first. And so for me, I ultimately decided to start at Kingsbury North and then go counterclockwise, which meant my resupply would be in Tahoe City. So that's what I did. And then from there, I ultimately had to decide how many miles a day I thought I could do. I always tend to, again, err on the side of caution. Obviously I could hike more if I feel better, but I don't want to plan on hiking a certain number of miles a day and then not be able to actually do that for whatever reason. And so based on that, I use the Far Out app, which I'll kind of show here. And I say, okay, if I'm planning to do 19 miles a day, if I start at this spot in the day, where does that put me? What does water look like throughout the day? And I kind of create a guideline for my entire trip based on that. Once I did that, then I was able to see where my dry sections would be, how long my water carries would be, and then ultimately what options I would have. So once I had done that and I had gone through every single day, approximately how many miles I would do, where the different water sources would be, I found 2 locations that would be ideal to have some sort of water cache. So I went on the Tahoe Rim Trail Facebook page and started asking questions, which I think a lot of people do, and found out about a trail shuttle driver. Her name is Cece. A lot of people have used her. She's great. And I contacted her. She also gave me some guidance on a couple of other things as well, which I can get to. But ultimately, because I was flying in, I'm not from Tahoe. I wasn't going to have a car. Logistically, it would be hard for me to place my own water caches. I hired her. So I had a water cache at Spooner, and then I also had a water cache at Brockway. So it kind of broke up my dry water sections, and it was perfect. At both of those spots, there were actually free water caches. So had I not hired CC to place those for me, I would have been fine. But I didn't want to take the chance and then not have water, which obviously would have been an issue. So she placed the 2 water caches, and then I had some longer water carries, but nothing that was never unmanageable. So that's kind of what I did when it came to planning my water. The other thing that was a big factor in the planning for the Tahoe Rim Trail is that you need a permit in Desolation if you do not have a Tahoe Rim Trail permit, and that's kind of the key there. However, with the Tahoe Rim Trail permit, you cannot get that until 7 to 10 days before your hike starts. So given that I was planning this obviously much further in advance, what I decided to do as just a safety precaution, because again, I like to just err on the side of caution, is figure out where I would be potentially camping within Desolation. So again, because I had mapped out how many miles I would be doing each day, where that put me each night, I had an idea of where I would be camping when it came to Desolation. So Desolation fell into the second half of my trip, coming straight out of Tahoe. I knew that I would be going into the Richardson Lake area, and then the second night would be at Aloha Lake. So I actually went into the recreation.gov website, reserved 2 camp spots. Actually, I think all you have to do is say when you're entering and then exiting, and you have a little bit of leeway there. But I was able to have those reservations, and that gave me kind of a safety net if for some reason I didn't get the Tahoe Rim Trail permit, which from what I've heard is not really an issue, at least as of right now. But that way I had the actual permit for Desolation, and I had that as something to fall back on. And it's important to do that pretty early, because there aren't a lot of those spots available. They can fill up, and then if you don't get the TRT permit, you could actually be in a situation where you don't have a legitimate camp spot for that night. Before I did the Tahoe Rim Trail, I was actually doing the Colorado Trail, as many of you know. And so thankfully on my 0 day in the middle of the Colorado Trail, it was like the perfect timing to be that 7 to 10 days. And it was actually like at like 4:30 on the 10th day. So I just barely made the cutoff, but I did. I was able to call the Tahoe Rim Trail office, got my permit for the TRT, and then I went in and released the camp spots that I had reserved through recreation.gov, and so that somebody else could utilize those. So that gave me a little bit more freedom then to camp wherever I wanted in Desolation. If I, wanted to choose just one night, whatever, it just gave me the freedom to do so. So that ended up working out perfect. The other thing you have to consider again, and then is in regards to your food carry. So I had, I think, allotted 5 days to get from Kingsbury North to Tahoe City, which I did not need. I think I did that in 4 days, if I recall. So I ended up carrying a little bit more food than I needed. And for me, I think one thing, and I've mentioned this in one of my other videos, is that I need to start maybe relying more on resupplies. I eat a plant-based diet, so for me, I'm a little bit nervous to be able to find food that will give me the nutrients that I need at some of the like smaller like convenience stores or whatever the case may be. So I've tended, as of my previous experience, to carry a little bit more food up front, just to ensure that I have some of those options that might be harder to get at like some of these smaller towns when it comes to like plant-based options. So essentially I carried 5 days. Again, I didn't need that many because I got there in 4, but I could have, I think when it came to that first section, there weren't a ton of options as far as resupply anyway. But if I would have started at like Echo, obviously you could get food there. There are, I think a couple other spots, like shorter, like you would have to get off trail where you could go and get a resupply. But again, I didn't want to do that. There was a Trail Magic at the Mount Rose campground, which I completely missed because I did not go up there. So again, I could have gotten some food, but again, it wasn't an issue. I had enough. And then coming out of Desolation, I mean, there is not a lot of option there. So you pretty much need to be sure to carry enough food to get you through Desolation, but then you go straight into Echo. And you can resupply there if you want as well. You can always resupply in South Lake. And yeah, those are, I think, some of the key places for a resupply. So all in all, I mean, one thing I learned from my planning is that while I think it's important to have a good idea of how many miles I want to do, I need to maybe be a little bit more flexible when it comes to like booking hotels and that sort of thing. Because on both of my trips, I ran into situations where I got to my town day, like my 0, ahead of schedule. And so I had a lot of logistics that then I needed to try to change last minute. And with having these hotels already pre-booked, maybe not having the best cell service while I'm in the mountains, it's hard to make adjustments. And while there could be a chance that you get to town and maybe there aren't any hotels, I think that risk is probably pretty slim. So I think moving forward, I will not book those in advance. That way, if I get into a town early, I'm not held to anything. I can make whatever decisions I make. On this particular trip, because as I mentioned, I thought I would take 5 days to get to Tahoe City, I was like, well, do I want to get an extra night at the hotel? It was an expense I wasn't necessarily wanting to incur. And so I was even thinking of going into Tahoe City, getting food, and then going back up into the mountains and camping for the night and then coming back down the next day, which is just crazy. Ultimately, I did not do that. I just ended up getting an extra night of hotel. But again, I mean, if I just would have maybe waited in booking that, then I could have just done one night. So my lessons that I've learned is I think it's very good to have a baseline, understand based off how many miles you kind of know that you can do, where does that put you, you know, how many days does it take you to get from where you start to maybe where you need to resupply. And then you can kind of base things off of that, but give yourself the opportunity to be a little bit more flexible, maybe not make those hotel or accommodation bookings in advance. And yeah, so that's one thing I will do different. The other thing for me is in my mind, I create these plans and I say, okay, I'm going to hike this many miles. I think what I found is I'm capable of hiking a lot more than what I've anticipated. And if I don't have those reservations, then I can really start pushing myself and see what I'm capable of and not have anything restricting me and saying, oh, I can't get to this spot till this time. So I think that'll be a fun challenge per se for myself on my next trip, is just to be a little bit more open and see what happens. One thing I did change from this year to last year was I even had like camp spots kind of pre-planned. Like I would go through the Far Out app and I would say, okay, there's a good camp spot here. I want to camp there. This year I did not do that. I tried to be a little bit more flexible, and just say, okay, I want to do this many miles. When I get to that range, I'll see what I can find. With the exception of Desolation, with it being the different lakes, I did have in mind, oh, I want to get to this lake or that lake, and because they were really pretty. I wanted to see those lakes. I wanted to camp at the lakes for the night and that sort of thing. Part of, again, that is just due to the fact that I'm a solo female hiker and I just wanted to have a little bit of security around that. But I'm working on being a little bit more go with the flow when it comes to what my days look like. And yeah, I think that covers everything. So we talked about water caches when it comes to TRT, food resupplies, Desolation. I think that's it. If there is anything that I failed to mention or that would be helpful, please let me know, and I can maybe just respond in the comments what I did. But yeah, I think actually one other thing I do want to mention, I'm sorry, is Cece also, in addition to the water caches, she's like a shuttle driver. So I had hired her to pick me up in Reno, and then she took me to South Lake, where I stayed at the Mellow Mushroom Hostel, and then she picked me up from there and took me to Kingsbury in the next morning. And then when I was done, they also, one of the ladies that works for her picked me up as well. So she kind of handled my travel logistics, if you will, which worked out perfect. I know there's shuttles from the airport that you can take as well. But yeah, I hired her. So yeah, I think that's everything. I hope this was helpful. For me, planning is half the fun. So I actually spend a lot of time looking through everything, and also learning about the areas I think is fun as well. But these are some of the things that were definitely big questions to me. I mean, even though the TRT is a loop and there's lots of trailheads, there are some unique factors that make the planning logistics a little bit more complicated than perhaps some other trails. So yeah, I hope that was helpful, and thank you for watching.